Arrogance has a funny way of engineering its own downfall. When Dylan Harper, the billionaire founder of a global tech empire, stepped onto Flight 100 to London, he expected nothing more than a quiet transatlantic crossing in his legally purchased first-class suite. Lead flight attendant Clarette Vaughan, however, took one look at the casually dressed black man in seat 1A and decided he simply didn't belong in her exclusive cabin. Blinded by prejudice and eager to fawn over a loud, flashy passenger dripping in fake designer gear, Clarette made the most catastrophic miscalculation of her life. What unfolded at 35,000 feet wasn't just a brutal collision of reality and assumption. It delivered a dose of instant, devastating karma so severe that it left the entire crew utterly speechless. The harsh fluorescent lights of John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 8 did little to dampen the chaotic energy of the Friday evening rush. Outside, the November rain lashed against the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the glowing red and blue lights of the tarmac vehicles. Inside, however, at Gate 14, a different kind of storm was brewing, one of silent judgments and misplaced arrogance. Dylan Harper stood near the priority boarding lane, a picture of quiet composure amid the restless sea of passengers. At 42, Dylan was the founder and CEO of Harper Logistics, a multi-billion-dollar supply chain tech firm that revolutionized how global airlines handled cargo and catering. He didn't look like the traditional corporate titan. There was no bespoke Armani suit, no gleaming Rolex submariner screaming for attention. Instead, Dylan wore a charcoal Brunello Cucinelli cashmere sweater, dark, perfectly tailored denim, and a pair of understated leather loafers. His luggage consisted solely of a battered vintage leather briefcase that currently held contracts worth more than the aircraft sitting at the gate. A few yards away stood Clarette Vaughan, the lead flight attendant for the Boeing 777-30 EURES exclusive flagship first cabin. Clarette, 34, with perfectly sprayed blonde hair and a rigid, almost theatrical posture, viewed the first-class cabin as her personal fiefdom. Over her 12 years with the airline, she had developed a toxic habit of profiling her passengers. To Clarette, the cabin was a place for Hollywood elite, old money heirs, and Wall Street executives. She considered herself the gatekeeper of this flying country club, and she took her self-appointed role far too seriously. As Clarette stood by the podium, chatting with the gate agent, her eyes scanned the waiting crowd. She immediately locked onto a man pushing his way toward the front. It was Arthur Pendleton. Arthur was everything Clarette associated with wealth. He wore a loud, checkered Tom Ford suit, a massive, diamond-encrusted watch that caught the terminal lights, and he was barking orders into his phone about mergers and liquidating assets. He was holding a Louis Vuitton duffel bag with the monogram practically flashing like a neon sign. Clarette's posture immediately straightened, a bright, practiced smile stretching across her face. That, she thought, is a VIP. Then her gaze shifted to Dylan. He was standing quietly in the Group 1 line, checking an email on his phone. Clarette's smile instantly vanished, replaced by a tight-lipped expression of suspicion. She took in his skin color, his casual sweater, and his lack of overt branding. In her narrow, prejudiced mind, Dylan didn't fit the profile of a man who belonged in a $10,000 seat. She immediately assumed he was either an economy passenger trying to pull a fast one, a staff member flying on a heavily discounted body pass, or someone who had gotten incredibly lucky with a last-minute miles upgrade. "Excuse me, sir." Clarette's voice cut through the dull roar of the terminal. She stepped away from the podium and approached Dylan, her tone dripping with a condescending sweetness. "I think you might be in the wrong area. This lane is strictly reserved for flagship first and Group 1 passengers." Dylan looked up from his phone, his expression unreadable. He had dealt with people like Clarette his entire life, people who looked at him and saw a stereotype rather than a man. "I am in Group 1, he said evenly, his voice calm and deep. "Are you sure?" Clarette asked, her eyes darting to his battered briefcase. "Sometimes the boarding passes can be confusing. Economy boarding will be in Zone 5, which is over there." She pointed a manicured finger toward the back of the crowded gate area. Dylan didn't argue. He simply raised his phone, displaying the digital boarding pass. Right at the top, in bold letters, it read, Harper / Dillon MR. Seat 1A. Flagship first. Clarette's eyes narrowed as she read the screen. A brief flash of irritation crossed her face. She didn't apologize. Instead, she let out a small, dismissive sigh. Right. Well, we'll be calling you shortly. Please step back until the announcement is made. Before Dillon could respond, Arthur Pendleton pushed past him, accidentally bumping Dillon's shoulder without a word of apology. Listen, sweetheart, Arthur boomed, grinning at Clarette. I got a conference call with Tokyo in an hour. Tell me we're boarding this bird soon. Clarette's demeanor flipped like a light switch. Oh, Mr. Pendleton, yes, of course, sir. We are just putting the finishing touches on the cabin for you. Please come right through. We'll get you settled with a glass of champagne immediately. Dillon watched as Clarette personally unclipped the velvet rope for the loud, abrasive man, ushering him down the jet bridge, while leaving Dillon, who held a ticket for the very first seat, on the plane standing in the terminal. Dion simply took a slow breath, slid his phone into his pocket, and prepared himself for a long flight. Stepping onto the Boeing 777 was usually a sanctuary for Dillon. The flagship first cabin was an intimate space featuring only 8 luxurious private suites designed for maximum comfort on transatlantic routes. The air smelled faintly of high-end citrus cleaning supplies and freshly brewed espresso. As Dillon stepped through the aircraft door, Sarah Jenkins, a younger flight attendant with a warm, genuine smile, greeted him. Welcome aboard, sir. May I see your boarding pass? Seat 1A, Dillon said quietly, showing her the screen. Wonderful. Right this way, Mr. Harper. Let me help you with your bag. Sarah reached for his briefcase, but Dillon politely declined with a smile, preferring to carry his own documents. Dillon settled into the wide, plush seat of 1A. He took a moment to organize his space, placing his laptop in the side compartment and adjusting the reading light. The quiet hum of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit was soothing. For a few minutes, he was at peace. Then, the storm returned. Clarette walked into the cabin, a bottle of chilled Laurent Perrier in one hand and crystal flutes in the other. She bypassed Dillon completely and went straight to seat 1B, where Arthur Pendleton was loudly complaining about the Wi-Fi speed while chewing on a piece of gum. Mr. Pendleton, a little pre-departure champagne to take the edge off. Clarette cooed, leaning over his suite and pouring the golden liquid. Make it a full pour, darling. Arthur winked, looking her up and down in a way that would have made any professional profoundly uncomfortable. Clarette, however, just giggled, completely enamored by the illusion of his wealth. Dillon, feeling parched from the dry airport air, pressed his call button. A soft ding echoed in the quiet cabin. Clarette glanced over her shoulder, saw it was Dillon, and visibly rolled her eyes. She took her time, chatting with Arthur for another solid 2 minutes, before slowly walking over to suite 1A. Yes, she asked. No, Mr. Harper. And, no, how can I help you? Just a flat irritated yes? I'd like a glass of sparkling water, please, with a lime if you have it, Dillon requested politely. Clarette sighed as if Dillon had just asked her to single-handedly push the aircraft to London. We are in the middle of a very busy boarding process. I'll see what I can do. She walked back to the forward galley. Dillon listened as the curtain swished shut. In the tight confines of an aircraft, acoustics are funny. Voices carry in unexpected ways. Can you believe this guy? Clarette's voice drifted through the curtain, sharp and annoyed. She was speaking to Sarah. Seat 1A wants sparkling water with lime right now. I swear these upgrade passengers get one taste of the front cabin and think they're royalty. Clarette, he's in 1A. It's not an upgrade. He's a full-fare passenger, Sarah's voice replied, sounding uncomfortable. I can take it to him. Don't bother using the good crystal, Clarette snapped back. Just give him one of the plastic cups from Premium Economy. We need to save the glassware for the real clients. Arthur in 1B drinks like a fish. A moment later, the curtain opened. It wasn't Clarette who emerged, but Sarah. She approached Dillon's seat, carrying a beautiful crystal glass filled with sparkling water, a perfect slice of lime resting on the rim, alongside a hot towel on a small ceramic tray. "Here you go, Mr. Harper." Sarah smiled warmly, her eyes holding a hint of an apology. "Please let me know if you need anything else." "Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it," Dylan said, making a mental note to send a commendation to the airline's executive team regarding her service. As for Clarette, Dylan's analytical mind was already turning. He didn't feel rage. He felt a cold, sharp clarity. He knew exactly what Clarette was doing, and he knew exactly why she was doing it. He had spent his life overcoming the barriers of prejudice, building a boardroom empire where results silenced bigotry. He decided he wouldn't make a scene. He would let Clarette dig her own grave. As the heavy boarding doors were finally closed and armed, Captain Richard Hayes made his welcome announcement over the PA system. The massive aircraft pushed back from the gate, the twin GE-90 engines roaring to life, vibrating through the floorboards. During the taxi to the runway, Arthur Pendleton dropped his phone. It slid across the aisle, coming to rest against the base of Dylan's suite. Arthur unbuckled his seatbelt, a clear violation of safety protocols, while the plane was moving, and leaned over. "Hey, buddy, toss that over, will you?" Arthur barked. Dylan calmly looked down at the phone, then back up at Arthur. "The seatbelt sign is on." Yeah, I know the rules," Arthur scoffed. "Just kick it over." Dylan silently picked up the phone and handed it across the aisle. As he did, the screen illuminated. It wasn't a spreadsheet of mergers or high-level emails. It was an open tab for a high-interest payday loan website, accompanied by a text message from someone named Vinny asking about late payments. Dion caught the details in a fraction of a second. The flashy suit, the loud talk, the fake diamond watch. Arthur was a fraud, drowning in debt, playing pretend in a metal tube in the sky. Dylan settled back into his seat as the plane accelerated down the runway, lifting off into the dark, rainy New York sky. The real flight hadn't even begun yet, and the stage was already perfectly set. The seatbelt sign chimed off as the aircraft reached its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet over the Atlantic. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft ambient blue, signaling the beginning of the dinner service. For international first class, this was meant to be a highly choreographed, luxurious experience. The multi-course meal, complete with wine pairings and warm hospitality. Clarette emerged from the galley, armed with the leather-bound menus. She went straight to Arthur, kneeling beside his seat to be at eye level. "Mr. Pendleton, we have a spectacular menu tonight," she purred, holding the menu open for him. "We have the pan-seared filet mignon with truffle mash, a beautiful Chilean sea bass, or a roasted duck breast. What can I tempt you with?" "I'll take the filet, sweetheart." "Rare." "Mount the most formidable crudius, and keep that champagne coming," Arthur demanded, throwing his menu onto the empty seat beside him. "Of course, sir." "An excellent choice." Clarette then moved to the other passengers in the cabin, bypassing Dylan entirely until he was the absolute last person left. She finally approached Suite 1A, not bothering to kneel or even offer a smile. She held a single menu limply in her hand. "Food orders," she stated flatly, looking down at him. Dion closed his laptop. He had been reviewing the final details of a logistics merger that would essentially give his company oversight of the very catering service that stocked this flight. "I'll have the Chilean sea bass, please, and a glass of the Chablis." Clarette's lips formed a thin, tight line. She didn't even check her notepad. "We're out of the sea bass." Dylan paused. He had boarded first. There were only 8 seats in the cabin, and only 6 were occupied. The airline's standard catering protocol, which his company's software tracked, mandated that there were at least 4 portions of the premium seafood dish loaded for this specific flight configuration. "Out of it," Dylan asked, his voice remaining low and polite. "I find that unusual." "Well, that's aviation for you." "Things run out," Clarette retorted, crossing her arms defensively. "The other passengers selected it first." "I see. Then I'll have the duck." Clarette smirked, a cruel, satisfied little expression. "Unfortunately, we are out of the duck as well. All I have left is the vegetarian mushroom risotto. Shall I put you down for that?" It's Onto all. It was a blatant lie, and they both knew it. She was intentionally denying him the premium meals, likely saving them for herself and the rest of the crew, or simply doing it to put him in his perceived place. "The risotto will be fine," Dylan said calmly. "And we don't have the Chablis shield," she added quickly. "I can offer you a standard house white." "Just water, then." Claret spun on her heel and marched back to the galley, looking incredibly pleased with herself. She felt she had successfully exerted her dominance over the interloper in her cabin. An hour later, the meal service commenced. Sarah, the junior FA, came out to set Dylan's table with the crisp white linen and silverware. When she brought out his tray, her face was bright red with embarrassment. It wasn't just the risotto. The presentation was sloppy. The sauce was smeared on the edge of the plate, and the side salad was missing its dressing. I am so sorry, Mr. Harper," Sarah whispered, leaning in close so Claret wouldn't hear. "I tried to plate it nicely, but Claret took over. And I know we have the sea bass. I don't know why she told you we didn't." Dylan moved at Sarah, recognizing a good employee trapped under terrible management. "It's not your fault, Sarah. Don't worry about it. Can I sneak you a glass of the Chablis?" "It is chilled," she offered nervously. "No, thank you. You've been wonderful, but I don't want you getting in trouble." Dylan ate a few bites of the lukewarm risotto and pushed the plate aside. He needed to stretch his legs, and he stood up and made his way toward the front lavatory, which was situated right next to the forward galley. As he approached, the curtain was slightly ajar. Arthur Pendleton had left his seat and was standing in the galley, leaning heavily against the counter, a glass of whiskey in his hand, chatting up Claret. Dion stopped just outside the curtain, waiting for a moment to let them finish before entering the lavatory. He didn't intend to eavesdrop, but the volume of their conversation made it impossible to ignore. "You must deal with all sorts of crazy people doing this job," Arthur was saying, his words slightly slurred from the alcohol. "You have no idea, Arthur," Claret sighed dramatically, clearly leaning into the attention. "It used to be so glamorous. Now anyone with a credit card and a few frequent flyer miles thinks they own the place. Take the guy in 1A. Dylan froze. "The quiet guy." "Yeah, he looks like he works at a hardware store." Arthur laughed loudly. "Exactly," Claret snorted. "He shows up in a sweatshirt and a beat-up bag, acting like he belongs in Flagship First. I guarantee you he's just some diversity hire who got a lucky corporate upgrade. Or he begged for a seat at the gate. It makes my skin crawl having to wait on people like that when I have actual important businessmen like you on board." The air in the galley seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sarah, who was standing in the corner organizing the dessert cart, looked absolutely horrified. "Claret, stop," Sarah hissed urgently. "Oh, relax, Sarah. Claret dismissed her. It's the truth. People like him ruin the exclusivity of the brand. He didn't even know what Chablis was, I bet. I gave him the economy slop and he just took it." Dylan stood in the shadows of the dim cabin aisle. He didn't feel anger. He felt a profound, chilling sense of finality. He reached into his pocket and pressed the record button on his phone's voice memo app, capturing the last few seconds of her laughter and Sarah's protests. He waited 3 seconds, let his phone slip back into his pocket, and then reached out and pulled the heavy curtain completely open. The laughter died instantly. Arthur almost choked on his whiskey. Claret whipped around, the color draining from her face so fast she looked like she might faint. Her eyes wide, she stared at Dylan, realizing he had been standing less than 2 feet away. Dylan looked at Arthur first, glancing briefly at the man's fake watch. "Enjoying the exclusivity, Mr. Pass. Pendleton, I hope Vinny isn't charging you too much interest on the civil joyride." Arthur's jaw dropped, his false bravado shattering into a million pieces. He stared at Dylan in sheer panic, wondering how this stranger knew about his financial ruin. Without another word, Arthur awkwardly shuffled past Dylan and practically ran back to his seat. Dion then turned his gaze to Claret. He didn't yell. He didn't raise his voice. His silence was far more terrifying than any scream. He looked at her with the cold, calculating eyes of a man who routinely dismantled multi-million-dollar corporations before lunch. "Mr. Harper. Mr. Harper," Claret stammered, her hands trembling as she grabbed a towel to wipe down a counter that was already clean. I didn't see you there." "Can I get you anything?" "No, Claret," Dylan said softly, his voice perfectly measured. "You've done quite enough." He stepped past her, entered the lavatory, and locked the door. When he returned to his seat a few minutes later, Claret was nowhere to be seen in the cabin. She hid in the galley for the next 3 hours, leaving Sarah to manage the entire first-class section alone. But Dylan wasn't just sitting idly. He opened his laptop, connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi, and opened a direct encrypted email channel. He didn't just type out a customer service complaint. He emailed the executive vice president of in-flight operations for the airliner man with whom Dylan was scheduled to have dinner in London the following evening to finalize a massive logistics contract. The subject line of the email was simple: operational concerns and personnel conduct on Flight 100. The Karma wasn't just coming for Claret Vaughan. It was flying toward her at 600 miles per hour, and there was nowhere left to hide. The Boeing 7777 hummed steadily through the pitch-black sky over the Atlantic Ocean, the glowing flight map on the bulkhead monitor showing them halfway to London. Inside the flagship first cabin, the atmosphere was thick with an unspoken, suffocating tension. Most of the passengers had lowered their window shades and reclined their pods into fully flat beds, wrapped in the airline's signature plush duvets. But there was no rest for Claret Vaughan. Hidden away in the forward galley, Claret stood rigidly by the espresso machine, gnawing on her manicured thumbnail. The adrenaline of her cruel little power trip had completely evaporated, replaced by a gnawing, icy pit in her stomach. The way Dylan had looked at her, the absolute lack of anger, replaced by a cold, cynical observation, terrified her more than any screaming match ever could. She had dealt with irate passengers before. She knew how to spin a narrative, play the victim, and call security. But Dylan Harper hadn't given her anything to use against him. He had simply witnessed her true nature and walked away. Sarah slipped through the curtain carrying a tray of empty water glasses. She placed them quietly in the sink, refusing to make eye contact with her lead flight attendant. "Is he asleep?" Claret hissed, unable to stop herself. "Mr. Harper. Mr. Harper." "No," Sarah replied coldly, keeping her back turned as she loaded the dishwasher rack. "He's working on his laptop. He asked for another sparkling water. I'm taking it to him now." "Wait," Claret snapped, grabbing Sarah's wrist. "Did he say anything? About me?" Sarah pulled her arm away, her expression hardening. "He didn't have to, Claret. You said enough for the both of you. You embarrassed yourself, you embarrassed me, and you degraded a passenger for absolutely no reason." I was just venting," Claret stammered, her defensive instincts kicking in. "He's probably nobody. Just some guy on a body pass who thinks he can intimidate me." "Are you insane?" Sarah whispered fiercely, grabbing the crew's digital manifest tablet from the charging dock on the bulkhead. She unlocked it and shoved it into Claret's hands. "You were so busy fawning over Arthur in 1B that you didn't even bother to read the CIP notes for this flight. Read it, Claret. Read the profile for 1A. Claret looked down at the glowing screen. The passenger manifest didn't just list names and seat numbers. For first class, it included internal codes, frequent flyer tiers, and VIP status indicators. Next to Dylan Harper's name, flashing in a distinct red font reserved for the highest tier of corporate partners, was the acronym CIPC1, Commercially Important Passenger, Category 1. Beneath that, in the detailed notes section, were 3 lines of text that made all the blood drain from Claret's face. Passenger is Dylan Harper, founder and CEO of Harper Logistics. Harper Logistics currently holds the 1.2B global contract for all internal supply chain routing and international catering procurement for this airline. Do not distribute unless a record. Provided exceptional served. Refot init issues directly to SVP Flight Operations. Claret couldn't breathe. The tablet suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Harper Logistics, the company that literally provided the software tracking the very meals she had just lied to him about. He wasn't a diversity hire. He wasn't flying on miles. He was the man whose company managed the airline's operational backbone. He likely knew exactly how many portions of Chilean sea bass were loaded onto the plane because his servers had routed the catering trucks to the tarmac at JFK. "Oh my God," Claret whispered, her voice trembling. "Oh my God, Sarah, what do I do?" "You leave him alone," Sarah said flatly, "and you pray he's a forgiving man." But out in the cabin, Dylan Harper was not in a forgiving mood. He was a man of precision and accountability. In the dim light of his suite, his fingers flew across the keyboard of his laptop. He was connected via the high-speed satellite Wi-Fi, engaged in a direct correspondence with Bradley Harrison, the executive vice president of global operations for the airline. Bradley was a close business associate. They were scheduled to meet at the Connaught Hotel in Mayfair the following evening to sign a contract extension. Dillon's email was brief, analytical, and devastatingly precise. "Bradley, I am currently over the Atlantic on Flight 100. The hardware and routing software updates we implemented last quarter are performing optimally on my end. However, I have encountered a severe failure in your frontline personnel. Ladefe Claret Vaughan has engaged in overt racial profiling, denied contracted service amenities, and openly disparaged passengers in the galley. I have audio documentation of the latter. I am bringing this to your attention not as a grievance, but as a liability warning for your brand. I expect to discuss this structural failure at our meeting. Regards, Dylan." The reply from Bradley Harrison arrived less than 4 minutes later. "Dillon, I am appalled and entirely humiliated. This is unacceptable and directly violates the core values of our airline. Please accept my deepest, most sincere apologies. Do not wait for our meeting at the Connaught. I am currently in London. I will personally meet your aircraft at the gate upon arrival at Heathrow. We will handle this immediately. Bradley." Dillon closed his laptop, a quiet click echoing in his private pod. He reclined his seat a few degrees, finally allowing himself to close his eyes. The trap was set. All Claret had to do was walk into it. Meanwhile, across the aisle in Suite 1B, Arthur Pendleton was experiencing his own private hell. The lavish, loud persona he had paraded through the terminal was entirely gone. He sat rigidly in the dark, staring blankly at the entertainment screen. The terrifying encounter with Dylan in the galley played on a loop in his mind. "Enjoying the exclusivity, Mr. Pendleton? I hope Vinny isn't charging you too much interest." How did he know? Arthur was a mid-level manager at a failing marketing firm who had leased the Tom Ford suit and maxed out 3 high-interest credit cards just to fly first class to London, desperate to project an image of wealth to a potential client who wasn't even returning his calls. He owed massive debts to unsavory lenders. The fact that the quiet, unassuming black man in 1A had casually dismantled his entire facade with a single sentence terrified him. When Sarah came by to offer Arthur a refill on his champagne, he flinched. No, Arthur stammered, pulling his blanket up to his chest. "Just tap water, please, and keep my privacy partition closed." The flight dragged on. For 6 hours, Claret did not leave the galley. She obsessively checked her uniform, fixed her makeup, and rehearsed a dozen different apologies in her head. She convinced herself that she could charm her way out of it. She would cry, she would claim she was having a mental health crisis, she would say she had mistaken him for a known security threat, anything to save her 12-year career. As the first pale streaks of dawn painted the horizon outside the aircraft windows, the engines throttled back and the plane began its gradual descent into the grey, overcast skies of London. A seatbelt sign chimed on. It was time for Claret to face the music. The cabin lights slowly brightened, simulating a gentle sunrise. Sarah walked through the cabin offering hot towels and fresh orange juice to the waking passengers. When she reached Dylan, he thanked her graciously, looking entirely rested and immaculate in his Cusinelli sweater, unaffected by the long journey. Sarah took a deep, shaky breath, grabbed a silver tray holding a single exquisite box of the airline's reserve, Godiva truffles, gift usually reserved for apologizing for massive flight delays, and walked out into the cabin. Her legs felt like lead. She stopped beside Suite 1A and forced the brightest, most apologetic smile she could muster. "Good morning, Mr. Harper," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I trust you managed to get some rest." Dylan paused his reading and looked up at her. He didn't speak, he just looked at her, waiting. Claret swallowed hard, thrusting the box of chocolates forward slightly. Mr. Harper, I wanted to personally apologize if there was any misunderstanding regarding the meal service last night. Aviation can be so chaotic, and I fear I may have misspoken about the catering inventory. I brought you our reserve chocolates as a token of my deepest apologies. I truly hope this hasn't soured your experience with our airline. It was a masterclass in corporate non-apologies. She was blaming chaos and misunderstandings, refusing to acknowledge the racism, the insults, or the deliberate sabotage of his service. Dillon looked at the box of chocolates, then back up at Claret's desperate, fearful eyes. "Keep them, Claret," Dylan said quietly. His voice carried no malice, only an unyielding authority. "You're going to need the comfort far more than I am." "No." "Not." Claret's fake smile shattered. She tried to speak, to beg, but the sheer finality in his tone silenced her. She backed away, practically stumbling into the aisle, and retreated to her jump seat by the main boarding door. She strapped herself in, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird as the landing gear deployed with a heavy mechanical thud. Flight 100 touched down smoothly on the tarmac of London Heathrow's Terminal 3. The thrust reversers roared, slowing the massive jet before it turned off the runway and began the long taxi to the gate. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London," Captain Hayes announced over the PA. "We ask that you remain seated until the aircraft has come to a complete stop at the gate and the seatbelt sign has been turned off. Now, Selt, Heat, Nature." In her jump seat, Claret felt a tiny sliver of hope. Maybe he's just trying to scare me, she thought frantically. Maybe he'll just get off the plane and go to his hotel. Businessmen are busy, he won't have time to file a formal complaint today. The aircraft pulled into Gate 11. The engines spun down into a quiet whine. The seatbelt sign chimed off, and the cabin erupted into the usual flurry of opening overhead bins and rustling coats. Claret stood by the L1 door, the main exit for first class. Her job was to smile, say goodbye, and ensure a smooth deplaning process. She looked through the small porthole window in the door, waiting for the ground crew to attach the jet bridge. The heavy machinery clanked against the side of the fuselage. A green light flashed on the door panel. Claret gripped the handle, turned it, and pushed the heavy door outward. Usually, the first person she saw was a standard gate agent in a high-visibility vest holding a pitboard. Not today. Standing in the jet bridge, looking impeccably sharp in a Navy bespoke suit, was Bradley Harrison, the Executive Vice President of Global Operations. Flanking him were two massive, stern-looking airport security officers, and Eleanor Davies, the formidable station manager for Heathrow Terminal 3. Claret's breath hitched. Her blood ran ice-cold. She recognized Bradley Harrison instantly from the company's internal training videos and executive memos. "Mr. Harrison." Claret gasped, instinctively straightening her posture and pasting on a terrified smile. "Welcome aboard. Is there an inspection today?" Bradley Harrison didn't smile. He didn't even acknowledge her greeting. He looked at her with an expression of absolute disgust. "Stand aside, Miss Bourne," Bradley commanded, his voice echoing in the confined space of the jet bridge. It wasn't a request. Claret practically pressed herself against the bulkhead, her hands shaking violently. Bradley stepped onto the aircraft, followed closely by Eleanor Davies. He bypassed the galley entirely and walked straight into the flagship first cabin. Dion Harper was just standing up, retrieving his vintage leather briefcase from the overhead bin. "Dillon," Bradley said loudly, his voice carrying through the suddenly dead-silent cabin. He extended both hands, grasping Dillon's hand in a firm, deeply respectful handshake. "I cannot express how profoundly sorry I am. On behalf of the entire executive board, I apologize for the disgrace you were subjected to on this flight." Every passenger in the cabin froze. Arthur Pendleton, who had been trying to quietly slip out of his pod, stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes bulging as he watched an airline executive bow and scrape before the man he had mocked. Dillon returned the handshake smoothly. "Bradley, I appreciate you coming down personally. It's an unfortunate situation, but a necessary one to address before it impacts your broader clientele. It ends today, I assure you, Bradley said grimly. He turned his head slightly, locking eyes with Sarah, who was standing nervously near the galley. Sarah Jenkins, correct? Yes, sir, Sarah squeaked. Your exemplary conduct and attempt to mitigate the situation have been noted. Thank you for maintaining the dignity of our brand, Bradley said, offering her a nod of respect. Then Bradley turned his attention back to the L1 door, where Claret was standing, trembling so hard her uniform vibrated. He walked slowly back toward her, the warmth completely vanishing from his face. Claret Vaughan, Bradley said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. You are hereby relieved of your duties, effective immediately. You will hand over your company ID and your tablet to Ms. Davies. Huh? You are suspended pending a formal termination hearing, which frankly will be a mere formality. Tears finally spilled over Claret's heavily muscarded eyelashes, leaving dark streaks down her cheeks. Mr. Harrison, please. It was a mistake. I was stressed. It was a misunderstanding about the catering. Do not insult my intelligence, Bradley interrupted sharply. Mr. Harper provided audio evidence of your conduct in the galley. We do not employ bigots, Miss Vaughan, and we certainly do not employ staff who deliberately sabotage the service of the man whose company keeps our airline running. Hand over your badge. Trembling, sobbing quietly, Claret unchipped the silver wings and the ID badge from her lapel. She dropped them into Eleanor Davies's outstretched hand. Gather your personal belongings, Eleanor instructed coldly. Security will escort you through customs and off the airport premises. You are not to speak to any other crew members. As Claret walked the walk of shame back to the crew rest area to get her bags, every eye in the cabin followed her. The ultimate gatekeeper had just been forcefully evicted from her own castle, but the karma wasn't quite finished yet. As Dylan and Bradley stepped off the plane, deep in conversation about their upcoming meeting at the Connaught, Arthur Pendleton seized his chance. He grabbed his flashy Louis Vuitton bag and scurried out the door, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the plane. He practically ran up the jet bridge. As he reached the terminal concourse, he was suddenly intercepted by two men in plain clothes, displaying badges from the UK Border Force, accompanied by a representative from the Metropolitan Police. Arthur Pendleton, one of the officers asked, stepping directly into his path. Yeah? What's the problem? Arthur stammered, his fake bravado failing him completely. We've received an international flag on your passport regarding outstanding financial warrants and suspected wire fraud linked to a syndicate in New York, the officer stated loudly, as dozens of passengers walked by. We're going to need you to come with us to the secondary screening room. Arthur's face crumpled. His entire house of cards had collapsed upon landing. As the police escorted the loudly protesting faux wealthy man away, Dylan Harper watched from the VIP arrivals lounge. He took a sip of perfectly brewed black coffee, adjusted his cuffs, and turned to Bradley. Shall we get to work, Bradley? Dylan asked, stepping out of the airport and into the waiting black Bentley. The immediate aftermath of Claret Vaughan's suspension was a masterclass in corporate efficiency. Within 45 minutes of landing, she had been stripped of her company credentials, her corporate credit card, and her access to the airline's internal scheduling app. Two Heathrow security contractors flanked her as she walked through the terminal, carrying only her personal tote bag and her roll-aboard suitcase. She wasn't allowed to use the fast-track crew lanes through UK customs. She was forced to stand in the standard, hours-long queue with the general public she so deeply despised. But the true humiliation began when Eleanor Davies handed Claret her return ticket to New York. Your flight leaves in 3 hours on the Boeing 777-1200, Eleanor stated, her voice devoid of any sympathy. You are flying non-revenue, deadhead, and because of the nature of your suspension, you are stripped of all cabin privileges. Claret looked down at the paper boarding pass. It wasn't a digital flagship first ticket. It was a physical economy class slip. Seat 34E, a middle seat in the very last section of the main cabin directly adjacent to the rear lavatories. Eleanor, please, Claret whispered, her voice cracking as the reality of her situation set in. I've been with this company for 12 years. I know half the crew on that return flight. You can't put me in a middle seat in the back. It's degrading. What is degrading this? Vaughn is treating a commercially important passenger like a second-class citizen because of your own personal prejudices, Eleanor replied sharply. You will sit in 34E, or you will purchase your own full-fare ticket on a different carrier. Good day. The flight back to JFK was agonizing. For 8 hours, Carrot sat sandwiched between a screaming toddler and a college student who slept heavily on her shoulder. Every time a flight attendant, people she used to boss around, walked by with the beverage cart, they actively avoided making eye contact with her. The news of her catastrophic blunder had spread through the airline's internal WhatsApp groups like wildfire. She was a pariah. She spent the entire flight staring at the seatback screen, the phantom audio of her own voice echoing in her head. He shows up in a sweatshirt. Just some diversity hire. 3 days later, the real reckoning occurred at the airline's corporate headquarters, the sprawling Skyview campus in Fort Worth, Texas. Clarette sat in a sterile, glass-walled conference room. Across the mahogany table sat Robert Callahan, the Senior Director of Human Resources, and a representative from the airline's legal team. Clarette had brought her union representative, a tough veteran named Diane, hoping the union could salvage her pension or at least negotiate a quiet resignation. Robert Callahan didn't waste time with pleasantries. He opened a manila folder and slid a printed document across the table. Ms. Vaughn, this is the catering manifest for Flight 100, Robert said flatly. It clearly shows 4 portions of the Chilean sea bass and 3 portions of the roasted duck were boarded. It also shows that only 2 portions of the base were consumed by paying passengers. Yet you explicitly told Mr. Harper that both options were unavailable. I made a miscalculation in the galley inventory, Clarette lied, her hands sweating. It was dark, and I miscounted. It was an honest mistake. Robert sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. He reached over to his laptop and clicked a button. The clear, high-quality audio recording Dylan Harper had captured in the galley filled the silent conference room. Clarette's cruel laughter played through the speakers. Her disparaging remarks about Dylan's clothes, her assumption about him being a diversity hire, and her blatant admission of giving him economy slop to protect her actual important businessmen echoed off the glass walls. When the recording stopped, the silence in the room was deafening. Even Diane, the union representative who was sworn to defend her, slowly closed her notebook, her face flushed with disgust. Ms. Vaughn, Diane said quietly, not looking at Clarette, the union has a strict zero-tolerance policy regarding racial discrimination and intentional sabotage of service. We cannot and will not file a grievance on your behalf for this. Clarette's safety net vanished in an instant. You are terminated effective immediately for gross misconduct, Robert Callahan announced, handing her the formal paperwork. Furthermore, because this termination is with cause specifically a violation of federal civil rights guidelines within an airspace jurisdiction, your flight benefits are permanently revoked. You will not receive severance. And the legal department has advised me to inform you that Harper Logistics has the right to pursue civil damages against you personally for targeted discrimination, though Mr. Siley Harper has graciously declined to do so. Clarette signed the papers with a shaking hand. She had traded a lucrative, glamorous career and a secure retirement for a fleeting moment of petty, prejudiced power. As she walked out of the Skyview campus into the blistering Texas heat, she realized she had nothing left. She was 34, unemployed, blacklisted from the aviation industry, and completely exposed. While Clarette's life unraveled in a sterile Texas conference room, the universe dealt with Arthur Pendleton in an equally swift, devastating fashion. The international flag triggered at Heathrow was not a minor administrative misunderstanding. The mergers Arthur had been so loudly discussing on his phone in the terminal were actually desperate, frantic attempts to move heavily leveraged money offshore, a last-ditch effort to avoid sweeping federal indictments back in New York. The glittering facade he had built was systematically dismantled by the authorities. His leased Tom Ford suit, once a symbol of his fabricated dominance, was meticulously logged and confiscated as evidence of his fraudulent lifestyle. He was denied entry into the United Kingdom, stripped of his electronics, and held in a harsh, windowless detention center for 48 agonizing hours. When he was finally marched back onto an aircraft, it wasn't to a private pod. He was deported back to the United States under the strict, unsympathetic escort of federal marshals, chained to a middle seat in the absolute last row of a commercial flight. The man who had arrogantly demanded endless pours of champagne was now drinking lukewarm tap water from a dented paper cup, facing multiple counts of wire fraud and grand larceny. He traded his first-class suite for a concrete holding cell in Lower Manhattan, his desperate illusion of wealth entirely extinguished. Meanwhile, 3 miles away in the heart of Mayfair, the atmosphere at the Connaught Hotel was decidedly different, a stark contrast to the chaotic fallout of Flight 100. Dion Harper sat at the head of a massive, polished oak table in a secluded private dining room. He was surrounded by Bradley Harrison and the rest of the airline's executive board. The dinner service had been flawless, quiet, anticipatory, and deeply respectful, a true reflection of genuine luxury. The multi-billion-dollar contracts, bound in thick leather folders, lay closed on the table, freshly signed. The tension in the room had dissipated, replaced by the warm, convivial energy of a successfully negotiated future. Dion, however, was not quite finished. He took a slow sip of the genuinely vintage Chablis, the crystal glass catching the dim amber light of the chandelier, and leveled his calm, calculating gaze at the executive vice president. "Bradley," Dillon began, his voice dropping the conversational hum of the room to a dead silence, "your swift action regarding the incident on Flight 100 was appreciated. However, removing a bad actor doesn't fix a broken system. You excised the symptom, but the disease remains." Bradley nodded slowly, setting his linen napkin down. "I'm listening, Dillon. I want Harper Logistics software deeply integrated into your crew-facing tablets by the end of the next fiscal quarter," Dillon stated, "not as a request, but as an absolute condition of their ongoing partnership. It will anonymize passenger wealth metrics and focus strictly on operational needs. Your frontline staff will no longer see VIP status tiers, frequent flyer bank balances, or corporate valuation codes on their manifests. I want to entirely blind the system to perceived wealth, preventing your staff from profiling passengers before they even step onto the jet bridge." Bradley didn't hesitate. "Consider it done, Dillon. We are overhauling the first-class training modules next month, and this software integration will be the cornerstone of our new service standard." "Excellent," Dillon said, a genuine, warm smile finally touching his eyes. "And one more thing, the junior flight attendant on that flight, Sarah Jenkins. She displayed remarkable grace under immense pressure and deeply toxic leadership. She tried to correct the service failure, risking her own standing, and treated me with dignity when her superior did not." "Nah." Bradley reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a gold pen, writing the name down on his personal notepad. "I've already flagged her file for a commendation, Dillon. What do you have in mind?" "I want her promoted to lead flight attendant," Dillon said simply, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "And if your airline doesn't value her enough to do that, let me know, because I will gladly hire her away to run the corporate hospitality division at Harper Logistics for double her current salary." Bradley smiled, recognizing the unwavering loyalty Dillon showed to those who demonstrated true character. "We won't lose her, Dillon. I'll see to her promotion personally. It will be finalized by Monday." "Not for by Mon. Secret worker." 2 weeks later, the chaotic energy of JFK's Terminal 8 remained unchanged, but the dynamic at Gate 14 had shifted entirely. Sarah Jenkins walked down the jet bridge onto a waiting Boeing 777. She wasn't wearing the standard unadorned uniform of a junior crew member. She wore the sharply tailored navy blue blazer and the gleaming gold wings of a lead flight attendant for Flagship First. As she stood by the boarding door, she ran a finger over the metal wings, feeling the profound weight of the responsibility they carry. She looked over the passenger manifest on her tablet. True to Dylan's word, the VIP tiers and wealth indicators were gone. There were only names, seat numbers, and dietary requirements. As the first passengers began to board, Sarah didn't look for loud checkered suits, massive watches, or designer luggage. She looked directly into their faces, greeting every single person from the tired mother in economy to the quiet businessman in seat 1A with a warm, genuine smile, ready to offer them the absolute standard of excellence they deserve. True power does not need to announce itself, and real wealth is rarely loud. The incident on Flight 100 serves as a stark reminder that prejudice is not only morally bankrupt but practically destructive. Claret Vaughan allowed her narrow-minded stereotypes to blind her to reality, sacrificing her career to impress a man who was nothing more than a glittering fraud. Arthur Pendleton learned that a leased suit cannot hide a life built on deceit. Meanwhile, Dylan Harper proved that true authority lies in composure, accountability, and the quiet execution of justice. He didn't just punish a wrongdoer, he elevated the person who did the right thing and fixed the system that allowed the toxicity to breed. In the end, the skies were cleared of arrogant gatekeepers, leaving room only for the genuine hospitality and respect that every passenger, regardless of what they wear or how they look, rightfully deserves.